talking
What
about
did I do
series.
yesterday?
You preached two sermons, well, the same sermon. He's preached it twice.
On Revelation? Maybe I did.
Maybe we should just start right there.
Folks,
Going live?
if you were there yesterday, we were in Revelation chapter 1.
That's right. Yeah, that's really showing whether people were there or not. What if we just started
let's just turn, man.
Everybody turn. Pastor, well, that's my favorite move you do, where you're like, guys, we're beginning today in the book of Exodus. So open your books to Ezekiel Chapter 31 and we'll begin.
Do I do that a lot? You know what I do?
That's my favorite thing you do. You always like show people like why you're going where you're going, and you know all the cross references and everything. I love that. Well, were you going to say something? I don't want to.
No, I'm just thinking about. I'm trying to recapture thoughts from. The overview.
We don't need to start right into it. We got to. There's a couple important things that we got to cover from yesterday, just in general.
Yeah, the Cowboys lost last night.
That's exactly where I was going. The Cowboys looked just putrid last night. It was terrible.
As long as Jerry Jones is there, they'll never do anything.
I just feel sorry for poor Dak Prescott. Okay, so Jared's back there showing us his Denver Broncos shirt. Huge game for the Broncos tonight. The revenge game for Russell Wilson.
That's right.
He's a huge. So you were born in Alabama, though, right? Yeah, he lived in Colorado for a while. There's no good professional teams in Alabama to root for, except for the Crimson Tide, which is a professional team at this point.
Yeah, they should be in the NFL.
You're preaching to the choir over here. So yeah, I'm sorry about the So you really didn't have a good day. You can't remember what you preached. The Cowboys were bad.
Yeah, I preached off last night, and I called
Deb.
Deb.
That's right. You went down,
when I got out of the service down there. I said I'm on my, because it took me about 2 hours to get home, and she said, "Well, the Cowboys are just starting to play." So by the time I got home, the sound was off. I knew it wasn't good. She's sitting there with the sound off on the thing.
Well, she roots for Jacksonville though too, right?
Oh yeah, but they lost yesterday. They had a lead and they blew it. But
that was rough.
Yeah.
I can't even remember. Were they playing the Commanders? The Washington football team.
Yeah, Washington. Yeah.
With their new name, the Commanders. Teams changing names all over the place. Tough to keep track of everything.
We live in a bizarre day.
It really. The times are very strange. That's Jared was telling me that the Broncos are going to change their name too.
Because horses are upset.
What did you say that they were going to change their name to?
The Denver Biscuits.
The Denver Biscuits, yeah, because biscuits are an inanimate object and therefore can't be.
No gender.
So the horses are all in an uproar about.
Yes, yeah. The horses are just bucking and braying all over the place.
They're marching across Washington.
They asked them to vote on the new name for the Broncos, but all the horses said nay.
That's it for the day.
See you guys.
Lowest form of humor.
I'll show myself out.
Puns. Lowest form of humor. That's what Steve Allen says.
The lowest form of humor. Yeah. Okay, fine. Well, yeah. So I guess we won't do the weekly dad joke minute or whatever.
Oh yeah,
it is.
give us the dad joke for the week.
Oh man. I shouldn't even say this. Well, you know what happens if you accidentally tap Dwayne Johnson on his rear end? You've hit rock bottom.
Oh,
God.
I said I shouldn't say it.
Wow.
You've hit rock bottom. Just like we have here on this podcast. Have I loosened you up enough yet? Are you ready to dig into it? So yesterday we did. You were preaching Exodus 1, chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. Now, I looked
kind
this
of an
up.
introduction to the book.
So I looked this up because I'm thinking about the whole series. There's 1,213 verses in Exodus, and I just did some back of the napkin math here. So that means that the congregation has only 173 more messages in your series.
What is that, 3 years? A little over 3 years?
So by the time, by December of 2025, we're going to be done with Exodus.
With the book of Exodus.
Do you feel good about that?
I'll try to do better. guys. I really will.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
No, I know. I listen. You don't have to point. I think about it myself all the time about my stars. Why can't you, incorporate more passages than what you do?
I'm not down on you, Pat. And every time people always comment on the podcast and they're like, Kirkwood, stop giving him a hard time. We want Pastor to preach longer. We want to do more.
No.
And I'm like, I feel the same way.
I never felt that way from Kirkwood. I know he's ribbing me over here.
I'm just giving you a little bit of a
He's pulling
hard
my
time.
leg. He's yanking my chain. He's
whatever it is,
all
whatever
those,
euphemism
all
you
those
want to come up
things.
with. Yeah. Well, because we're going to get, and yesterday it really was introductory, because you didn't actually stay too long here in these first 7 verses.
No, I did not.
You were jumping around, but you did something which was so worshipful for me, and I hope the rest of the congregation picked up. You went through some main points, some of the seminal moments in Exodus.
Right.
And you talked about how Christ is the fulfillment of all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I want us to rehash some of that now.
Okay.
Because I can tell the Spirit's doing a similar thing with me. Or, sometimes Pastor and I accidentally do the mind meld.
Yeah.
Because I didn't talk to you about the message beforehand. But then to the choir, when we were praying before everything began, I said, now guys, what we need to pray for is that people are going to recognize that this book is not about Moses, but it's about God. And then you said the exact same thing as soon as you got in the pulpit.
Wow.
I'm out. See you guys.
Wow.
That's twice I've left the table. I can leave the table now because we have different microphones. You can still.
Well, that's amazing. But it is. The book is not about the Hebrews. It's not about Moses. It's not about the Egyptians. It is an encounter with God, with the living God. I mean, what more can you say than when you get to chapter 3, and there is God, and Moses encounters him on the backside of the wilderness. If I'm going to encounter God, where's it going to be? Okay, St. Paul's in London, or, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, or, the Dome of, in Cologne, Germany, the great cathedral there, or Milan, or, in St. Peter's. Here's Moses, and he encounters God on the backside of the desert.
Yeah.
In a burning bush.
Well, and and you talked about, it's such an interesting play on words, because it elsewhere in Scripture talks about how the Lord is a consuming fire.
Yeah.
And yet the fire is there, but the bush is not consumed.
It's not consumed. It's so fascinating. One of the things I started to bring up was, and I might do it this Sunday, because we start in verse 8. Now, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Now, how is that possible? Well, I'm going to tell you how that's possible.
Oh, okay.
Sunday, and it deals with this. You remember when God brought Abraham into the land of Canaan, there was a famine, and he leaves the land of Canaan, goes down into Egypt.
Right.
And, God really rails on him about that. You had no business doing that. You don't leave here where I'm going to take care of you. Well, here you come 3 generations later, and there is a famine again, and God has made it to where if they go to Egypt, they can get help. So what in the world? It's sometimes you look at Scripture and it's just like it's this way, and then it all of a sudden turns and it's that way.
Well, and that's where we're so grateful for your leadership in that, because it's so easy to miss those things.
Yeah.
And
have you ever wondered about that? I've thought about that. Well, here 3 generations away, he's got it fixed up where they can go to Egypt.
If they would have just, waited.
That's
on
where the supply is. He told Abraham, "You stay here. The supply is here. I'm here." In the days of Joseph, now the supply is down in Egypt, and so he sends those sons down there to Egypt. They have to go down to Egypt to get food. So it's kind of a reversal of what he did with Abraham, which goes back to say, you can't put God in a box. You can't say God's always going to do this, 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 and this, and I've got God figured out, and he's nice and neat over here in this little box.
No. He's like C.S. Lewis said, he's not safe. Like you can't always
That's right.
predict
Aslan,
exactly
he's
what
just
he's going to
not.
do.
No, he is not safe.
But he is good.
Always good.
The burning bush thing was interesting to me, and this just occurred to me while you were going through that, because you have the all-consuming fire of the Lord, but he doesn't consume the bush.
Right.
And then this is the same God who says that no man can look upon me and live. And yet Moses is looking upon him, and it lives through it. You have the bush that lives through it, and you have Moses that lives through it. It's like God is staying his hand in a sense.
Well, the interesting thing is that, let's see, I probably shouldn't. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of the bush.
Good point.
Now,
That's
who is
chapter
that?
3.
You see.
Perhaps the pre-incarnate Christ?
Yeah. That's what I
always wanna
think.
go there.
One of the great Old Testament theologians who's alive today says he doesn't think that the angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Christ. And I would never disagree with this man. I was his pastor for 7 years, but I'd never disagree with him. But I think I disagree with him on that point. You know.
So you never disagree with him? What do you think he does?
On that one point, I think I do. I'd never, I wouldn't want to debate him about it because he probably would turn me inside out. But I think it is. I really, honestly think it is the pre-incarnate Christ.
It's really interesting, man. You could do an awesome Wednesday night lesson on all of the instances of the possible pre-incarnate Christ in the Old Testament.
You really could.
He's there with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yep.
He's here.
He's here in the burning bush. He's
Melchizedek.
in the cloud.
He's in the cloud. That's another good point.
Yep.
Melchizedek is another really interesting one. Now you say that we talked about this
Yeah.
before. You say that's not the.
No.
But
I think that's Shem. Personally, I do.
Shem, Noah's son. Oh my gosh, I need to hear this Wednesday night lesson. I'm making you do. I'm going to start planning Wednesday nights, just telling you what.
I think Shem lived on and met Abraham, and I think that's why God. You see Melchizedek once every 1,000 years. You see him there with Abraham. It's another 1,000 years before you hear of him again in the Psalms with David, and then another 1,000 years until the writer of Hebrews.
That's interesting. So we're due. So where was he? Where was he at A.D. 1000?
A.D. 1000.
Yeah, and then he was, and then he came around. I know.
Where's he been for the last two millennia?
We're waiting on him. You mentioned 1 Corinthians 10. You talked about God's presence in the cloud. You talked about that they all drank. Now, I missed this a little bit. This is somewhat hidden. God, there's so many things I want to talk about. I guess I'll just have to save some for next week. But you said, and what's interesting is I read this again. We're doing the mind meld. I read this text in the service like 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah, you did.
Although I kind of read it out of context, and I was sad about that, and I meant to apologize to you about that.
That's all right.
They all drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Does that mean that the rock was literally just rolling
That's what the
them?
rabbis say. That's what the rabbis say. Now, the rabbis will say a lot of goofy stuff, but
they really will.
They say that this rock that Moses brought. Now, Moses didn't bring the water out of it. We all know that. God did. But when he went over to the rock and struck the rock and water came out, they call it the Wadi Musi, the waters of Moses, and that rock moved and rolled and followed Israel through the wilderness. That's what the rabbis say.
The original Rolling Stone. There you go. So God was into rock music for a long time.
Who would have ever thought that Mick would have known his Old Testament that well?
Yeah. Well, it's got that Mecharer. That's got that Jewish last name. So what would you say? It's a spirit. I mean, it says a spiritual rock.
Yeah.
They drank from the same spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. So I feel like that's more like.
I think
Paul
all of
himself
that
says
is a
spiritual.
reference, honestly, to the Word of God.
Well said.
You know.
The rabbis will say some interesting things. I wonder if I
they
could.
will.
I went and looked at Chabad.org this week because I was studying. This is not even about the message. I probably shouldn't even talk about this. But it's that verse in, is it 113? Precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death of his saints.
Yes.
What psalm is that? I wish I was looking at another Bible. I've got too many different Bibles. But I looked it up and I'm like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And I'm looking at all the, the post-Reformation commentators in general. And then I go to Chabad. What are the rabbis say, and they translate the word precious completely differently. They translate it as difficult. They say difficult in the eyes of the Lord is the death of his saints. I really shouldn't.
That's interesting.
And I'm like looking at it, and then I go to the interlinear. You know, I'm a Hebrew scholar and everything, so I was just checking my work. And I go to the interlinear translation, and difficult doesn't appear at all. And I was so confused, and now I'm confused because I can't remember which psalm it is. Google that real quick. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. I'm way off the rails now, Pastor. I'm sorry.
Well, how did you ultimately translate the word?
116.
Well, it 116.
116:15.
Well, it's I mean, precious seems to be the best way to do it because over and over again, it's talking about it's used to that same word yadar is used to describe jewels, and it's used to describe other valuable things. It's like worthwhile is another use of it, and difficult is never a use of it. So anyway, this is a super long illustration to show sometimes like you get in there and you're like, I just don't know where it came from. I need to go talk to a rabbi. And see.
Well, you'll get, for as many rabbis as you ask, just like pastors, you're going to get
a bunch
that
of
many
things.
different interpretations and ideas out of it. Yeah.
Really, really good point. Okay, sorry. So the rock, I'm all over the place. So we talked about the spiritual rock. You mentioned 1 Corinthians 10. We need to wrap up fairly soon. Let's go back to Exodus and just a few more ways that you're pointing out Christ in Exodus as we get started with this, and then how does that set us up for where we're going to go in the weeks to come?
Well, you'll have to wait until we get there, but the whole of the tabernacle was a picture of Christ.
Absolutely.
The whole of that thing
Preview.
is a picture of Christ. Everything, not just the sacrament, but all of the material and all of the way it was. The temple was a picture of Christ that Solomon built.
Good point.
It's fascinating how, and that's why I said yesterday, I think Exodus becomes the glasses of redemption through which you see the salvation of the Messiah. If you want to understand, to me personally, if you want to understand the New Testament, you really need to get a grasp on Exodus.
Well, I'm grateful that you're going to help us go through all that. If you guys want to skip it, so pastors preaching through Exodus, but you in your personal study time are welcome to begin to read as much of it as you like. I've been reading ahead. If you want to read a cool passage, the last passage in the entire book, when the glory of the Lord finally fills the tabernacle, that's incredible. I was trying to imagine that this week. Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the clouds settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. He was not even able to enter into it because the glory of the Lord had settled upon it. I wonder, what did that look like? What did that feel like? Was it like a force field? Was there just such a fear around that? But I think it's amazing that the Lord gave them this plan. They accomplished the plan, and the Lord was pleased to dwell with them in that way. I love stuff like that.
Yeah, I love that the Bible says that the cloud would settle over the tent of meeting, and Moses and Joshua would go out, and all the people would come out then and stand at the doorway of their tent. So that whenever Moses went up to speak to God, the people would come out in reverence and would stand there. There's so much in this. There's a passage in here. I am really debating, and I'm not even going to tell you what it is, whether or not I'm going to preach this or not, because I'm not sure that I can be delicate enough to get through it. But it's a wild passage. It's a passage where God is going to kill Moses.
You've got to preach that one. I know exactly what you're talking about. The Lord sought, on his way back to Egypt, the Lord sought to kill him.
Yeah, he's going to kill him. God's going to kill him.
That's a tough one.
It's a tough. What do you do in the 21st century with difficult passages like that?
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned molar last week or 2 weeks ago, and I remember when I was studying that passage a couple years ago that it was Moeller's message that.
Has he got a message on that?
Yeah, it was. I thought it was really decent. I think it was a convocation at Southern a few years ago.
Wow. Well, if he could handle it at convocation, maybe I can.
Well, and it's like you said, he probably wrote it in 15 minutes or so
He
before.
probably did.
before he
He's got
up
that
there.
kind of brain.
I wanted to say this last thing about the burning bush. I watched The Prince of Egypt with the kids like a month ago, and one thing I'd never noticed before is that their treatment of the burning bush is when Moses gets to it, it's on fire, but the bush looks dead. And over the course of the conversation,
It comes to life.
yeah, it starts to bloom, and then like the consuming fire is working in reverse and giving the bush light. I thought that was a really
Now that's
cool
an
thought.
interesting thought. It's just not biblical.
No, I mean it's not in the Bible, but it
You
just.
know,
I
but that's
thought that
it
was
is
interesting.
that you see you can make a really good. That would be a great point to make. What you think is going to kill you really gives you life.
Right, right.
But we just don't have that.
yeah,
there.
that's inference. That's not actually in the Bible. So
I wonder if the rabbi said something about that
I
because who did that? Was it Spielberg?
that's right. Yeah.
Who's a good Jew, so he may have known, he may have read that the rabbi said something about that.
The rabbi.
In the Mishnah, you know, the stories that grow up around the text.
That's true. Yeah, and there's a lot of that. Should we counsel the people to begin reading the Mishnah?
Yeah, start reading. Just pick it up and start reading wherever.
Okay. Hey, this has been fun. Thanks for coming in, Pastor. We're all praying for you. We know you got a
Thank you.
difficult funeral for your sister
Yeah,
this week. Prayed for you this morning.
Thank you.
And we'll continue to do so. But we'll be back on Sunday with the next message in Exodus. Thank you guys for tuning in. Say goodbye, Pastor.
Goodbye, Pastor.